As a general rule, when minorities rule over a majority, they tend to rule unfairly, if not despotically and tyrannically. And why is that, you ask? Because they tend to rule out of fear. Fear of going back to the situation or the status that they were in when they were ruled by a majority that was not fair, repressive, oppressive, bad to them overall. So what's the lesson here? Is it that minorities should never rule, should never be empowered enough to rule? No. The lesson is that the majority should know how to rule better a society that is diverse and that has minorities that are different. If the fairness exists from the beginning, there will be no rebellious, and therefore there will be no minority rule, and therefore there will be no unfair and oppressive minority rule. So how does that apply to the Middle East? I'll tell you how. 400 years of Ottoman rule over the Middle East and stretching way over the Middle East caused that. How, you ask? Because the Ottomans ruled their minorities in general as second-degree citizens. On good days, they just forced them to pay tax. But most days, they basically persecuted, starved, aggressed, imprisoned, forced to migrate, all kind of shit. And most minorities in this whole area that the Ottoman Empire ruled over kind of kept a low-key in order to avoid being killed. They paid their taxes, kept a low-key, except the Christians of Lebanon, the Maronites. Mount Lebanon back then, it was their area that where they lived was called Mount Lebanon. They rebelled continuously. They never accepted their status as second-degree citizens, that they had to pay taxes, that they had to do this or that, or that they had limited independence over their lifestyle, their religious practice, their whatever they want to do. They never accepted that. And these continuous rebellions caused the Ottoman Empire to be more and more oppressive, really bad. At multiple times, those Christians in Lebanon asked the help of France. France came to their rescue and helped elevate their status even within the Ottoman Empire. So, when the Ottoman Empire fell, it no longer existed. The Brits and the French came to this region, in particular mostly the Levant area, as a mandate. What's a mandate? It is not colonization. A mandate means that they were assigned to prepare the people of this region to draft new constitutions, to draft new laws, to learn how to govern themselves, and of course, to draw new borders. Remember, under the Ottoman 400 years of rule, these countries that you see today, Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, whatever, they didn't exist. Not in these defined borders. The names were there, but they were all governorates of the Ottoman Empire. And therefore, so if you're going to draw new borders and create new countries, basically, you need to learn how to do it, because these people really didn't know how to do it, except the Christians of Mount Lebanon, because they had a much higher level of autonomy because of, their history with the Ottoman Empire. So those Christians went to the French and told them, well, since you're drawing borders, we want Lebanon, Mount Lebanon back then, to be a country for us to rule over ourselves. We no longer want to live under any Islamic rule. The French agreed. The religious authorities of those Christians, the Maronites, decided that Mount Lebanon was a little small. We need to expand it a little more. So they went ahead and expanded a little more to the north, to the south, and to the east. But what does that mean? That means that they had to join in that new greater Lebanon a Muslim population that lived there. So in order for those Christians to preserve themselves, to preserve their power over this country that they wanted for themselves, they made sure in the constitution, in the laws, in the rules, that the Christian vote is always the final vote over everything in Lebanon. That's how they kept the upper hand. Now, while you could understand their fear of going back to previous times, this naturally meant that the rule was not fair to the Muslim population. So, when hundreds of thousands of Palestinian refugees fled and came to Lebanon, armed and angry, what did they do? They wanted to start a a war with Israel out of Lebanon. They wanted to turn Lebanon into their new battlefield. Of course, the Christians, to them, this was an existential threat. They did not want to get into a war with anybody, much less with Israel. But the Palestinians were armed and they were hard to control. And what happens next? The Muslim population, who had grievances, as I've noted, decided to empower themselves by aligning themselves with these armed fractions, the Palestinians, in order to eventually force the Christians to give them equal rights. And so the civil war begins. Same thing happened to other countries, but instead of going into a civil war, basically like happened in Lebanon, they basically started a revolution and toppled their despotic and minority leaders. Now the big question: did the US do this, or did the actual people do this? Okay, I know the conspiracy theorists want to think that or believe that it is the US that made these revolutions, toppled these people because they were done with them, they didn't want that. Okay, no, that's not what happened. No matter what you hear, if you read something, read the whole thing, not the headline only. It's not just a click thing. Okay, so here's what it is. No, the US government did not cause the toppling of these Arab leaders and these revolutions that happened. Who was helping? The non-profit organizations in the US and also in Europe. They were helping the people who were opposed to this dictator regime and wanted to find a way to topple them somehow without bloodshed and war. So they were teaching them democratic values. They were teaching them how to advocate, how to knock at doors, how to talk to people, how to convince them to engage. That's the intervention. They taught them things they didn't know. They helped them in that way. It is not what you think. And not to mention that your conspiracy theory just takes away credit to the people who actually did it. A final note on this. That's why Israel is a Jewish state. That's why the Jews never wanted to rule Israel as a minority Jewish. They can't do that because they know what's going to happen. It's always been important to them to keep Israel as a majority Jewish state with a minority of non-Jews. And believe it or not, this minority of Arab Jews and, Arab Israelis live just fine there. No matter what they tell you, the situation in Gaza and the West Bank is a whole different situation. But those living inside,